Well, the first thing I would like to present is that Peru, however bad it looked, we had the worst death record in the world in 2020, only after the United States. We had 650,000 dead in the first 3 months of the pandemic. Given that, we all expected a disaster. We have a neoliberal economic policy. It's been there since 1992. And we looked at the presence of the state in health. It was tiny. And of course, in education, it is also tiny. So the result was dead people. Immediately after, the Ministry of Health said, no, this is ridiculous. The president said we have to do something. And they put money from the sovereign wealth fund. And they injected, in the end, they injected the GDP is not here. Well, they injected 5% of GDP and managed to recover the economy to levels that were higher than 2019. So the economy recovered quite fast. And as you can see here, the reserves grew substantially between 2019 and 2021. So it dropped and then back up. And why did they recover? Because exports went up. Exports grew because of what has been explained by Jayati earlier. The volumes remained the same, prices went up, so reserves grew. And if we look at Latin America, for practically everybody, that's the fourth quarter of 2020 and the third quarter of 2021. And you can see that reserves fell in Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Costa Rica, and El Salvador, but it grew every place else. And in Peru, reserves grew 7.6% to 80 billion US dollars. What's happening with some of the money of reserves is that it goes into the sovereign wealth fund. And that's where it's kept. And because it is kept in the sovereign wealth fund, when they inject it into the fiscal expenditure, it does not appear. It's not external financing, and it's not taxes. So it's just below the line item that finances it, and it worked. It worked, and it made the GDP grow with the same shape as international reserves. Here you have the exports, and here with the exports you can see how they grew dramatically. And that dramatic growth is prices, basically. Now we have the prospect, and that's, I hope the image was here, but it's not, that we could see how the growth in GDP, which is very high, will now be restored to a 3.3% level. And it is projected to remain at around 3.3%. In all of the IMF readjustments downwards, I haven't seen the last one, but the previous one, a couple of months ago, it was still 3.3%. So apparently, in spite of all of the political instability in the country, and the country is very unstable, we have a growth projection that is stable. Now, why? That's the question. Why? We have a central bank that is very conservative. It has kept the exchange rate fairly stable with a dirty float. and it's remained stable in spite of the fact that there was a loss in reserves last year, in 2021, between March and July. There was a $13 billion loss of reserves. That took the exchange rate up. Then they started using the money from the sovereign wealth fund. That helped to compensate a little bit. And the prices helped. Prices helped. And eventually the money that had left the country came back in when they saw that the president was not a huge radical communist, but rather a middle of the road person who didn't know quite where he was going. And he had the wrong associates, put it that way. So you have a political problem there. There's very little confidence. And you have an inflation problem. The inflation problem we all have. In Peru, it's slightly less. And in spite of the fact that it's slightly less, it has caused a lot of unrest. There has been unrest from the transport union. They have been pressing for rises in transport prices for passengers and for cargo. And there has been unrest on the prices of agricultural goods. So there is unrest, but there is growth. The projected growth is still good. And this is one of these strange cases where the neoliberal policies seem to work, to my amazement. The numbers say something. Social reality is saying something else. But the numbers are working, and the numbers seem to be working well. I have no idea how long the president is going to remain in power, or if we're going to end up having a Sri Lanka sort of a scenario where everybody goes on the streets and says, everybody out. No, an Argentina 2001 scenario. I don't know. But so far, the numbers seem to be working, and it looks optimistic. Chinese investors are still going in. And I think there is right now, they have stopped investing right now, but they will retake when certainty becomes greater. No? There's uncertainty right now on the president. There's a clash between Congress and the president, and there's uncertainty of if the president is going to remain. And that's been so for the last several months. So that has stopped the new Chinese investments from starting, but the projections are massive of Chinese investments in mining. Chinese investments in Peru are the largest in the country, and they are basically in mining and in energy. And in energy, hydroelectricity, and energy distribution, basically. But they are also probably going into clean energy, renewable energy. So that's the outlook for investments. The tourist industry recovered, and it also recovered faster than anybody thought. I mean, it was expected not to recover very much, and people were scared that the hotels would remain empty and so on, and it has not been the case. The case has been that Cusco is back as a main attraction, and the restaurants are filled with people. So it's recovered. So it looks, strangely enough, Peru seems to be coming along, except that politically it's not coming along. So the unrest is there, the economics is flying on its own direction, and that's about all I can say about it. Yep, that's it. Now, chapter 2, and this has nothing to do with Peru. I was thinking ages ago about the problem of companies and debtors who borrowed abroad because it was cheaper to borrow abroad. And now they're stuck, and this is not a Peruvian problem, it's a general problem. They're stuck with exchange risk. Because as we can see, we're probably all going to have a balance of payments problem sooner or later. And that's probably going to push all of the rates of exchange upward. So I was thinking if perhaps it might not be the time for central banks to do in emerging economies what central banks did in the G7 countries, except not in the way they did it in the G7 countries. What I have thought is that perhaps central banks can have a guarantee window where firms go and pledge physical guarantees. The central bank issues a guarantee note, and with that, the firm goes to the capital market and issues a bond, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, whatever, and turns the external debt into a domestic currency debt. And that way, the firm can keep on going in spite of the exchange rate risk. And that can be accompanied by a process of developing a local futures currency market so that the debtor buys whatever amount he needs to pay the debt back the following year and the next year. And you can have a capital market development with bonds, and you can have a futures currency market. That I thought, because I am not sure how, particularly domestic companies that borrow abroad, are going to go through a massive exchange rate risk if it comes to pass. So this is a suggestion. The other suggestion is my old suggestion of an international board of arbitration for sovereign debt, but that's already dead. So, yeah. Okay, thank you.